it was 1988. My younger brother called me up one morning, early in the morning, and he said, it's a big A, sis. I remember crying all the way to my mother's house because back then, if you had an AIDS diagnosis, you were dying. That's all there was to it.
In 1989, my best friend in Mexico City died. I find out like about 1 month later, 2 weeks later, and I said, wow, nobody told me, But in 1993, I went back to Mexico City. I went to visit his mother, and she told me, you know what, Gustavo died from that horrible disease called AIDS. Take care of yourself.
So I got this job where I was working in San Francisco, but I was still living in New York. In order to make that happen, I needed also an oncologist in San Francisco. So I was recommended to this very good San Francisco oncologist, and I went the first time, the second time, the third time I went. He, instead of having the test, which I always had the blood test done to apply leukemia, he said, come into my office. And he said to me, I cannot see you anymore, and you cannot come here anymore because I did a test and you're HIV positive. And to encounter someone telling me that he wanted me to come to the doctor anymore because I would contaminate everybody else's blood, that was a tough one.
I was in shock, AIDS. Then I come back to Houston. In that year, my brother from Church of Christ, he died also. And I was talking about myself, oh my God, he never told me that he was gay, But back those days, AIDS only was for gay people. That's what the people were saying. When I discovered that these two very important persons on my life, they died from AIDS, that when I was starting in my mind, I need to do something about it. And that's when I started putting the pieces, the words for the Latin American Foundation for Against AIDS.
There was another woman, Carol Lefevre, who was a lesbian who I had helped with an intervention for her a couple of years before that. And she came to me around that same time and said, I have AIDS, what are you going to do about it? There were no services, no prevention services, let alone any direct services like housing or case management or any of those things for Native Americans. And but nobody did. Nobody picked up that work.
I am not a person that will sit and not think of what to do to make this better. So I said, oh my God, I like painting and drawing and all that, so I started. So it was a new thing that I had to learn. And I put myself on a state of mind that it was like going back to school, and I was going to learn. And that was incredible because all of a sudden I started to live again.
We created a housing complex for people living with AIDS. We have a variety of services and youth theater, which I created in 1990. We knew nothing about theater. We just knew that storytelling was an important part of our culture and was an important way to get the message to youth, especially about HIV prevention. And so we had to go back and think of, well, what is healthy sexuality in our community? What is a way that we can grieve these losses that we've had in a way that's part of our culture, as opposed to Kubler-Ross or anybody else. And so we had to go and do all those research, and There were many spiritual elders in the community who worked with us and helped us along that path.
Project Fire was a HIV/AIDS prevention, hot, horny, healthy for men, wet, wild, well for women, in which we talk about ways that people can have safer sex. And that was in 1990. In 1992, we also started the Fireball. We call it the Fireball because we also had categories within the Fireball where the houses would compete for presenting a safer sex message in the context of the ballroom scene. And we had, the first one that we had was in February of 1992. And there was a snowstorm. And I couldn't believe that we would still have this ball. And they kept telling me the children will show up, the children will show up. At 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, there was very little. At 9 o'clock, there was very little. At 11 o'clock, the place had about 800 people in there in the middle of a snowstorm. I will never forget one thing that one of my friends said at a meeting when I was going to an HIV Hot, Horny, Healthy workshop. And what he said was that when you have a person from a poor background and you're telling them to think about how they have sex, when they have sex, and where they have sex, you're taking away the one freedom that they felt that they had because of their economic condition. The one thing that they could do is I have my body. And now you're telling them that you don't even have that.
My doctor told me in May of 2001, he recommended that I leave work because the way my body was reacting to the virus, and even with the meds, the chronic fatigue that I was having and the other issues I was having physically, that I was under way too much stress for me to stay healthy on the long term. And I ignored him. I had never felt more validated in my career in my life. I was doing things that I felt were really important. And I loved what I did. I loved it. So I ended up in a situation where I worked myself into the ground again. But towards the end there, I can remember sitting at my desk and literally being in tears because I could no longer keep up with the demand and I didn't know what to do. And I called my sponsor, and I still have a sponsor in program. She's been my sponsor for 20-some years. And I started whining to her about, my life was my job and I made a difference in the world. And she said, honey, I have something to tell you. I said, she's not going to be easy to hear. You used to be important. Now you're not. Get over it. I went out and got the tattoos on my hands that day. I'd always been tattooed. I've been heavily tattooed since I was a young man, all over my body. But I didn't have any tattoos that showed when I worked in the corporate world. And that day I went out and got the tattoos on my hands. And I haven't looked back.
I developed a couple of buildings in Harlem. And because I was learning that some of my neighbors actually had become homeless when they developed AIDS and couldn't pay their rent and got evicted, from their apartment, either because they didn't pay their rent or because of AIDS phobia. I wanted to use my housing development skills to try to create some housing for people who were becoming homeless. People were literally sleeping in the streets, in parks, under bridges, in subway tunnels. And so since the city's approach was to let people live in the street, we decided let's create an AIDS housing street-based center right in front of Housing Preservation and Development, the city offices for housing. And so we took my pickup truck and a friend's van and started going around the city on bulk pickup night to pick up furniture that apartment buildings had put out when it was being discarded by their tenants. We literally shipped all of the furniture that we eventually collected, in the van and the truck set up living rooms and bathrooms and even like some kitchen, an old stove in the middle of the street, and chained ourselves to it. Parked the van on one end of the block, the pickup truck on the other end of the block, and literally made the city have to like bring tow trucks to tow the vehicles away, bring devices to cut the chains off of us to get us off the furniture. It took so long for the city to have to mobilize all of those things that we were, on the 5 o'clock, the 5:30, the 6 o'clock news, with a story of AIDS activists protesting the lack of medically appropriate housing, blocking traffic in Lower Manhattan. So our demand was for a $25 million capital fund to create medically appropriate housing. And ironically, within 2 weeks, the mayor's office, matched that demand. And a couple of weeks later, the governor of New York, then Mario Cuomo, matched it as well. So, we mobilized $50 million of capital funding for the creation of AIDS housing just from that demonstration.
We don't spend a lot of time talking to the youth we work with about the problems in the neighborhood. They see it every day, but we can't help them to become people who are the solutions to the problems.
We, as a planet, need to realize that we have to do whatever it takes to teach the future generations acceptance and compassion, and to behave in ways that help each other.
To be a trans woman, to be an immigrant, that doesn't speak English, all those kind of things, okay, that also never let anybody to put you down.
I put my energy more and more into, as time progressed in my life, to saving people from HIV. That became my new work.
I've been through too much in my life to not be who I am in the world. It's not worth it for me to hide any portion of myself anymore.
Too many people died, horrendous deaths, not to have something positive come out of their deaths, and the community response that, is now giving people life.